الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على أفضلهم وخاتم النبيين محمد الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ونزلنا عليك الكتاب تبيانا لكل شيء وهدى ورحمة وبشرى للمسلمين صدق الله العظيم. Brother Chairman, respected Imam, brothers and sisters here at Masjid Darul Ihsan in Subang Jaya in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our subject is entitled Madinah to Nabi fi Akhir Zaman, or in English, Madinah returns to center stage. Madinah returns to center stage in Akhir Zaman. And this lecture is already written out. And it is very small, so there is no excuse. The city of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, the city that he went to when he made hijrah. And we live in a world today in which so many are making hijrah and so many more want to make hijrah. The city of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, where he sleeps in his grave at this time. And Akhirul Zaman. What is Akhirul Zaman? It is the last age. History will not continue endlessly. There is an end to history in which truth will triumph over all rivals. And that end of history must come first before the world can end. When will the world end? We don't know. That's not our business. Only Allah knows. But when will history end? Oh yes, we do know. Because Allah's Messenger gave us many signs by which we can recognize that we are living in the last age. Amongst them is this sign that you will find tall buildings. If you have not seen the tall buildings as yet, I suggest you take a taxi to KLCC, Kuala Lumpur City Centre, and then look up in the sky and you will see the Twin Towers. Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam told us more than 1400 years ago that this would come. So if you can't see the tall buildings and thus recognize that you're living in the last age, Akhirul Zaman, something is wrong, something is wrong. In this last age, there is a destiny for the city of Madinah. And it is that subject that we address tonight. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, Madinah occupied center stage in the world. Only once before had Islam been established in the world as a state. And that occurred with Nabi Dawood alayhi salam. and then with his son Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. And it was known as the holy state of Israel. And in that holy Israel, Allah was recognized as Al-Malik. Sovereignty belonged to Him. Allah was recognized as Al-Akbar. Supreme authority belonged to Him. The politicians don't like this at all. No. And in that city, Allah was recognized as Al-Hakam. His law is the supreme law. And His law is enforced as the supreme law. That was Holy Israel, in the Holy Land, Al-Ardul Muqaddasa. And after that, only one more time was Islam established on the earth as a state under the authority of a prophet of Allah. And that was Madinah. And so Madinah succeeded Jerusalem in center stage on the world stage when the Prophet ﷺ died. We knew it as the Khilafah state. The Khilafah state. A state which recognized Allah as sovereign, recognized Allah's authority as supreme, recognized Allah's law as the supreme law. What Allah made halal, the state enforced as halal. What Allah made haram, the state enforced as haram. So simple. And then came the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And strange things began to happen. And the Khilafah was taken out of Madinah. You know, the little oasis in the desert, agricultural town, having no significance except for goats and sheep and so on. So let's take it to Damascus, a more civilized city, a more famous city. And so the Khilafah went to Damascus, it went to Baghdad, it went to Cairo, it even went out of the Arab world into a new part of the Arab world, Andalusia, but still Arab. And then it went mysteriously so. And this history is still to be written by a historian who perhaps is not yet born, or maybe is now a baby, but who will one day write this history. The Dajjal, the false Messiah, was at work when the Khilafah was taken. The Khilafah was taken out of the Arab world, taken to a people who did not have credentials to rule over the heartland of Islam. The Ottoman Empire had many things that you don't know about, and we'll have to speak about when we give the lecture, inshallah, I think next week, on the conquest of Constantinople in Akhirul Zaman. I think that lecture is next week, inshallah. About 100 years ago, in another 10 years from now, it will be 100 years since the transfer of power took place in Mecca. after the Ottoman Turkish rule over Mecca and Medina, which lasted for almost 400 years, an Arab Spring came to the Arab world. And as usual, it was a European engineered Arab Spring, a Zionist engineered Arab Spring, which injected the virus of Arab nationalism, and consequence of which Sharif al-Hosein, the Ottoman appointed Sharif of Mecca, rebelled against the Ottoman rule in 1916. And then in 1924, when Mustafa Kemal, I don't call him Ataturk, I call him Mustafa Kemal. When Mustafa Kemal, acting in accordance with the wishes of his Zionist masters, announced the abolition of the Khilafah. An attempt was made to bring the Khilafah back to the Arab world, where it should have been, in the heartland of Islam. The Khilafah started in Madinah. So Sharif al-Hosein, 7 days, or was it 4 days, either 4 or 7 days, after the Turkish Grand National Assembly announced the abolition of the Khilafah, Sharif al-Hosein, who is probably the great-grandfather of the present king of Jordan, he declared, I am the Khalifa. I am the Khalifa, I claim the Khilafah in Mecca. Well, this was a positive move. He abolishes the Khilafah, and we say, no, you should not do that. The Khilafah is an essential institution of Islam. And so he attempts to preserve the Khilafah by establishing the Khilafah once again in the Hijaz, in Mecca. But that was not in accordance with British and Zionist planning. You see, they had first of all made an agreement with him at the time when he rebelled against the Ottomans. Lawrence of Arabia had gone into Arabia with a checkbook, sterling pounds, and paid him 7 million sterling pounds to come on our side. So if you are a client of the Anglo-American Zionist Alliance, Judeo-Christian Zionist Alliance, you can't turn against them, tabule. So his claiming to be the Khalifa was not pleasing to the British, who then turned to another ally that they had, someone who didn't have the clout that Sharif Hussein had, so he couldn't ask for 7 million pounds. He was in Riyadh. His name was Abdulaziz ibn Saud. He was known as the Sultan of Najd, and he had to be content with 5,000 sterling pounds a month. And when his people, his armed force, the Ikhwan, not the Ikhwan in Egypt, when they asked him, how could you take the 5,000 pounds a month from the British? Huh? Haram? He said, no, this is jizya. This is jizya. So the British turned to another ally of theirs, who then sent his armed force against Sharif al-Hussein and defeated and conquered Makkah. In fact, they did it without any fight. Makkah surrendered. And that was, in 10 years from now, that will be 100 years since that occurred. And so the regime change took place in Makkah, and 1 year later in Madinah. And Makkah and Madinah now come under Arab rule. Arab rule. Would the status of Makkah and Madinah be restored? Would they come back to center stage? Would the Khilafah be restored? Would Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, who's made an alliance with the Wahhabi movement, and I do not use the term Wahhabi in any pejorative way, no, would they restore the Khilafah? You must be making a joke. Abdul Aziz ibn Saud knows very well that his masters in London would not allow him to do that. If he were to claim the Khilafah, the same thing would happen to him that happened to Sharif al-Hussein. Because the Zionists do not want the Khilafah state to survive. And now we can understand that Dajjal was at work. Dajjal wants to destroy the Khilafah, and his planning takes hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. That's why there's a historian who is going to come who will write this history one day, but is not yet written, using the tools of analysis out of Ilmu Akhirul Zaman, Dajjal. We now understand that the Ottoman success in taking over Constantinople and then in building that powerful Ottoman Empire and then taking over much of the Arab world over its control, and then taking the Khilafah to Constantinople, out of the Arab world for the first time in the history of Islam, in the history of this Ummah, the Khilafah is taken out of the Arab world. We understand that this was a preliminary step on Dajjal's path to eventually demolish the Khilafah. And that Ottoman rule, which lasted for 400 years, was meant to prepare the way for the destruction of the Khilafah. And so when Ibn Saud, Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, and I have a book on this subject, it is entitled The Caliphate, the Hijaz, and the Saudi Wahhabi nation state. Maybe Haji Radwan will translate it into Bahasa, inshallah. We are out of stock of that book. It has to be reprinted. I wrote it 35 years ago when I was a PhD student in Geneva, and I had access to the United Nations Library in Geneva. That's where I got all this information from, which otherwise I could not access because it's destroyed. That book tells the story of how these events took place. Abdul Aziz ibn Saud now has control over Makkah and Madinah. What is he going to do? In that book that I just mentioned, you'll find the history of how the world of Islam responded to the abolition of the Khilafah, the destruction of the Khilafah by Mustafa Kemal. Jamiatul Azhar in Egypt was the first to respond. And they decided that their response would be a Khilafah conference, Mu'tamarul Khilafah, which they organized to take place in Cairo in 1926. I don't think you were born at that time. But Abdulaziz ibn Saud then decided to sabotage the Cairo conference, because the Cairo conference was organized to restore the Khilafah. To restore the Khilafah. And that bothered the British a lot. So he organized a rival conference in Mecca to sabotage that. And that rival conference in Mecca, also in 1926, but on the occasion of the Hajj, that rival conference saw Mecca once again come to center stage in the affairs of the world of Islam. After so many 100 years, Mecca returns to center stage in that conference which was organized in 1926 in Mecca. He organized that conference because he wanted the world of Islam to accept his rule over the Hijaz. But thank Allah that we had men, scholars of Islam from India, who attended that conference. Like Maulana Muhammad Ali Jawhar, rahimahullah. And the Maulana stood up and faced the king to his face and rejected his claim. And when the Indian Islamic scholarship stood up and declared their position, that no, the Hijaz does not belong to you, then the rest of the conference, including the Saudi delegates, could do nothing. And so the effort failed. That was Makkah. The king decided that the conference should take place every year at the time of the Hajj. MashaAllah. What a wonderful suggestion, eh? That the whole of the world of Islam should come together at the time of the Hajj. That the affairs of the world of Islam and the affairs of the world at large may be discussed by the leaders and the scholars. What a wonderful idea by Abdulaziz ibn Saud. But because the conference said to him, no, we don't recognize you, that was it. The conference was never held again in Makkah. So Makkah now begins to recede back again, no longer occupying any position of significance. What about Madinah? Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam is in Madinah. What would Abdulaziz ibn Saud do about this city? When they failed in their effort to get political recognition, they decided a plan for Madinah, that Madinah will now become a university town. So they established the Islamic University of Madinah. And this university in Madinah is now charged with the task, because it's not only a Saudi state, it's a Saudi Wahhabi state. And the Wahhabis have a Protestant version of Islam. Study the Protestant movement in Europe and you'll understand much about the Wahhabi Islam. And this Wahhabi Islam, this Protestant Islam, is now going to be established in Madinah in this university. Students are going to come from all over the world. And from Madinah, a new version of Islam, which is the authentic Islam. Authentic Islam will now reach out to the world of Islam. And the target that you have to attack and demolish is Sufism, the Sufis. The Sufis are the ones who have destroyed Islam. They brought all kind of shirk and bid'ah and this and that and the other. And we have the task of purifying the faith and restoring the original faith. Oh, but the original faith had a spiritual heart. The original faith had men who could see with the nur of Allah. The original faith had men, you couldn't take them for a ride. No, that was the original faith. اتقوا فراسة المؤمن فإنه ينظر بنور الله. So if you are going to restore the original faith in Madinah, you are going to produce those scholars who will be able to see that Saudi Arabia's subservience to an alliance with the Anglo-American Zionist alliance is a betrayal of Islam. A horrendous, monstrously wicked betrayal of Islam. If you are going to produce in this university men who have the purest version of Islam, then there'll be people who have eyes with which to see. And they will ask the question, well, how come? You have control of the Hijaz, you have control of Makkah and Madinah. Why are you not restoring the Khilafah? At least this much will come out of the university. But Protestant Islam has eyes and yet cannot see. Protestant Islam has ears and yet cannot hear. Protestant Islam has hearts and yet do not understand. Ulaika kal-an'am. They're just like cattle. Don't be annoyed with me for speaking the truth. If you had any integrity, then for the last 70, 80 years, you would have been raising your voice in Makkah and Madinah and calling for the restoration of the Khilafah. If you had any integrity, you would have denounced the Saudi regime for their subservience to and the alliance with the wicked, the monstrously wicked Anglo-American Zionist alliance, Judeo-Christian alliance. Allah in the Qur'an has prohibited Muslim alliance with the Judeo-Christian alliance. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض. Do not take such Jews and do not take such Christians, not all Jews, not all Christians. Do not take such Jews and do not take such Christians as your friends and allies, who themselves are friends and allies of each other. The Qur'an is referring to this Judeo-Christian, Anglo-American Zionist alliance. And if you become their allies, as Saudi Arabia has done, as Kuwait has done, as Qatar has done, so many others, وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّهُمْ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. Whosoever from amongst you turn to them for friendship and alliance, you've lost your Islam. You now belong to them. And Allah does not provide guidance for a people whose trademark is wickedness. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ. And so the university town was dust in your eyes. The claim that this is the pure Islam was dust in your eyes, because it was Protestant Islam all the way in Madinah. We now turn to our subject about the destiny of Madinah in Akhirul Zaman. And when we take up this subject, the Saudi state is not going to like it at all. Oh no. But this is the word of the Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alayhi Wasallam. And we now have the internet, we now have YouTube, which can take these words, you can't stop it. All the people of Saudi Arabia can listen now and hear what we have to say. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam spoke and said, the hadith is narrated by Mu'adh ibn Jabal, and it is in the Sunan of Abi Dawood. He said that Umranu Bayt al-Maqdis, at that time when Jerusalem is flourishing, when Jerusalem is in center stage of the world, at that time, Kharabu Yathrib, Madinah at that time, will be in a state of desolation, having no significance at all, playing absolutely no role whatsoever, not in world affairs, not in affairs of the world of Islam. Umranu Bayt al-Maqdis, Kharabu Yathrib. And then he said, Kharabu Yathrib, Khurujul Malhama. At that time, when Yathrib, meaning Madinah, Yathrib is the old name, Madinah. When Yathrib is in a state of desolation, at that time the world will experience the Malhama, the great war that will make First World War and Second World War look like peanuts. That's Malhama. And then he said, now listen carefully, that Khurujul Malhama, Fathul Constantiniya, that at that time when the Great War takes place, at that time it will lead to the conquest of Constantinople. Today, Mustafa Kamal didn't like the name Constantinople because it's there the hadith. So he changed the name from Constantinople to Istanbul. That's the reason why he changed it, because he doesn't want you to read this hadith. That's why. And then he said, Fathul Constantiniya Khurujud Dajjal. At that time, when Constantinople is conquered, that is a time when you experience the Khuruj of Dajjal. Now, I have another lecture coming up at De Palma Hotel. You know where De Palma is? Ampang Point. On this subject, the conquest of Constantinople. Oh, is it in UAE? UAE, sorry. Yes. This subject is at the university, the International Islamic University. The conquest of Constantinople in Akhirul Zaman, I think it's July 4th? Yeah, July 4th, inshallah, at the International Islamic University. So, the conquest of Constantinople will lead to the Khuruj of Dajjal. It will take some time for me to explain the term Khuruj al-Dajjal. Where are we now in that timeline? Is Jerusalem now at center stage in the world? The answer is, Jerusalem is very close to that. All that Jerusalem now needs is the collapse of the US dollar, which is about to take place, the collapse of the US economy, which is about to take place, and because of our study of Islamic eschatology, ilmu akhiru zaman, we were able to tell you 15 years ago that this is going to happen. Protestant Islam could not do that. No, no. At this time, all that Jerusalem needs is not only for the US dollar to collapse, for the US economy to collapse, not only for paper money to disappear, and all the world is now imprisoned in electronic money, digital money, but also that the United States must be trapped into a military adventure that will lead to the possibility of defeat for the United States. And Israel has to intervene to save the United States from defeat. And that the United Nations organization probably has to fold up and be shifted to Jerusalem, that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank probably have to shift to Jerusalem. I don't know whether these things will actually occur or not, whether it will be necessary or not, but when you see these things happening, you know that the United States is being taken off center stage as the ruling state in the world, so that Israel can replace the United States. And so Jerusalem becomes the ruling city in the world. This is Umran Bayt al-Maqdis, the flourishing state of Jerusalem. This is what the hadith is speaking of. And so our analysis is that we are now located at that moment in time when Jerusalem is already in a flourishing state, or Jerusalem is about to take over into that state which is the flourishing state that the Prophet ﷺ is speaking of. But Protestant Islam may have other views, and they may have read in some kitab or some kitab or some kitab that Jerusalem had that flourishing state so long ago. Well, then those who are convinced by Protestant Islam can accept that view. And those who are persuaded that this is the moment can accept this view. Alhamdulillah, no boxing gloves necessary. And we are brothers. And so, if we are now living at that time when Jerusalem is in the state of the flourishing state, as said of in the hadith, we are also living at that time when Madinah is now in a state of desolation. Everybody can see that Madinah is playing absolutely no role whatsoever in the affairs of the world and in the affairs of the world of Islam. Not even in the affairs of Saudi Arabia. It is in a state of desolation, mournful desolation. Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam is left. He's gone, he's put aside. He's weeping in his grave. And so now we can expect the malha, the great wars. And as I said to you, these great wars which are coming, I don't think it's one war, I think it's several wars. These great wars which are coming are going to make the First World War and the Second World War look like a fight over peanuts. Because this great malhama which is coming is going to substantially reduce the population of the world. Most of mankind now alive will not be living when the malhama has ended. But the malhama is going to affect the Arabs more than all others. The malhama involves also, I believe, nuclear warfare in the world between the two major alliances, the Anglo-American Judeo-Christian Zionist alliance and the Russian-led alliance, which are both nuclear armed. And this nuclear warfare, which involves probably thousands of nuclear weapons exploding, could possibly lead to such a cloud cover, mushroom, that no sunlight can penetrate. No sunlight can penetrate. We don't have it either in the Quran or in the Hadith, the 3 days of darkness. But ask any Christian, Kumar, who is now Yaqub, he took the Shahada last night, he probably knows about the 3 days of darkness in the Christian scriptures. What we have is dukhan or smoke. And that could be, and I can be wrong. And let me repeat it one more time before we have the azan. That yes, I do give my opinions. Yes, I do. But whenever I give opinion, I do not want you to accept my opinion. No. You must only accept my opinion when you are convinced that it is correct. Because if I have students who accept everything that I say, then when I make a mistake, no one will correct me. The malhama is the great war. I believe it will be a series of wars. I believe that it is going to climax with nuclear warfare between the two nuclear powers in the world, the American-led alliance, the Zionist alliance and the Russian alliance. Why will this great war take place? Answer: because the Zionists want to rule the world. Simple. Why do the Zionists want to rule the world? Because the Zionists want that a state of Israel be restored in the Holy Land, and they want to give to that state of Israel the status of ruling state in the world. Simple. Well, why do they want the state of Israel to rule the world? Oh, any follower of Muhammad ﷺ could answer that question. It's so simple. Although now we live in that age when you never hear this from the mimbar anymore. Nobody talks about Dajjal from the mimbar. Nabi Muhammad ﷺ, I was studying this hadith just last week. He says, the time will come when no one will talk about Dajjal from the mimbar. That's what he said. But you and I know the reason why Israel wants to become the ruling state in the world is so that a man who would be a Jew, who would be a young man, who would be powerfully built, who would have curly hair, and you know I always had this belief that curly hair meant top of the head, curly, until a student from Egypt met with me. He was passing through and insisted I had to go to the airport to meet him, and we were talking so much he missed his flight. So he explained to me, no, Sheikh Imran, it's not curly hair, it's over here. The Orthodox Jews, because of the Torah, they have to have curls at the side, the face. That is what the Prophet ﷺ is talking about. This man wants to rule over Israel and then rule over the world, and so he can make a claim that I am Al-Masih. Oh, but we have the Quran. The Quran told us Al-Masih is the son of Maryam, alayhi salam. And you are not the son of Maryam, but he is the false Messiah, Dajjal. He wants to declare that I am the true Messiah, so he has to rule the world. And all those who see with only one eye, like Dajjal, the other eye is blind, meaning internally blind, they will accept him as the Messiah. Protestant Islam will also say, this cannot be Dajjal. No, tabulate. Why? Oh, the Prophet said, Dajjal has only one eye, this man has two. So he can't be Dajjal. That's Protestant Islam. This is the reason why we are heading towards Malhama, the Great War. 10 years ago, I wrote Jerusalem in the Quran. Most of you have read it already. We now have it in Bahasa, but of course Bahasa is twice the size of English. If you have not read it as yet, please read it, so you'll understand why the Malhama is coming. This great conflagration, because Russia will not bend its knee to Israel, and China will not bend her knee to Israel. That's why you're going to get the Malhama. But I believe the Malhama is going to be several wars, not just one war. And at the end of this Malhama, we're going to witness the conquest of Constantinople. Now this is strange, because it was universally accepted by the world of Islam, including Protestant Islam. Oh, the Constantinople was already conquered 600 years ago. Sheikh Imran, have you been sleeping for so long? Have you not heard about the Sultan Muhammad Fatih, the Ottoman Sultan who conquered Constantinople in 1456, I believe? You've been sleeping for a long time. No. When you read this booklet, you will find the evidence that could not qualify as the conquest of Constantinople, about which Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam said, the hadith is in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. You're going to get the Arabic text of each one of these ahadith in this book, inshallah. Madinah returns to center stage in Akhirul Zaman. He said, لَتَفْتَحَنَّ الْقُنْسْتَنْتِنِيَّةِ, you will most certainly conquer Constantinople. You, meaning the Muslims. لَتَفْتَحَنَّ الْقُنْسْتَنْتِنِيَّةِ, you will most certainly conquer Constantinople. وَلَنِعْمَ الْأَمِيرُ آمِرُهَا وَلَنِعْمَ الْجَيْشُ ذَلِكَ الْجَيْشُ. And he praised that army as a wonderful army, and he praised the commander-in-chief, the wonderful emir of that army. These are the words of Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. We do not have the time tonight to take up the subject. Why do we reject the view that that conquest, that Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1456 was not the fulfillment of this hadith. Could not be. There are a number of reasons, but we'll take it up in that lecture at the International Islamic University, inshallah. But for tonight, this much. The conquest of Constantinople takes place just before the khuruj of Dajjal, meaning Dajjal will now appear in the form of a human being. Khuruj. Dajjal was released from his chains in the lifetime of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Dajjal is the mastermind. He is the architect of the political system that we now have and the modern secular state, which says, have you heard? The modern secular state says, Allah is no longer Al-Malik. No. Allah is no longer the sovereign. The state is now sovereign. And if you can't understand that, you got peanuts in your head. Allah is no longer Al-Akbar. Allah does not have supreme authority anymore. No. Supreme authority in all matters pertaining to international peace and security now resides with the Zionists sitting in the Security Council of the United Nations. We have a question and answer session coming up. Anybody can challenge me, eh? I love that. Because I've studied my subject. Allah is no longer Al-Hakam. No, He is no longer the supreme lawgiver. The state is now the supreme lawgiver. The parliament is now the supreme lawgiver. Do you think this came from? It dropped out of the sky? No. This is Dajjal. He created it. Do you think Protestant Islam recognized that? No. Allah has made halal and Allah has made haram. But the modern secular state can make halal what Allah made haram, and can make haram what Allah has made halal. And if you cannot see that, you have peanuts in your head. And yet they go and they faithfully vote to legitimize what Dajjal created to replace the Khilafah. Not me. You're not going to find me going and voting to legitimate that state. Not me. And not my students. But if the cattle want to go, let them go. Let them go. So Dajjal was released at that time. Where do you think paper money came from? Huh? And the electronic digital money that's coming, which replaced the dinar and dirham. This paper money which has functioned as an instrument of financial enslavement, which has taken Indonesia to where Indonesia is now, taken Bangladesh to where Bangladesh is now, taken Pakistan and Egypt to where they are now. Who do you think has brought this monetary system into being? This is Dajjal's work. But Protestant Islam will never say that. No. They got eyes and they don't see. They got ears and they don't hear. They got hearts and they don't understand. And my frustration has led me now to the end of the road. End of the road. I don't know what more to do with these brothers of mine. And so Dajjal is the mastermind. He was released in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. But he will only appear in human form at the very end of his life. Read this book and it will tell you the story. There are 3 circles, 3 blue circles there. This cover design is by a Malay artist. It shows Dajjal's first stage and second stage and third stage until Dajjal appears in human form. And that is the khuruj of Dajjal. Now let's go back to the malhama, which is the heart of our subject. I expect that Israel is going to make a move sometime soon, probably within the next few months. Israel can either attack Pakistan to destroy the nuclear plants and denuclearize Pakistan, and then India takes over to break up Pakistan, or attack Iran, not only to destroy the nuclear plants, but more importantly, to bring about regime change, so that a new government comes to Iran which will be virulently Shia and who can make a deal with Israel. Not this government in Iran, no sir. You have to get another one. Or attack Syria, which might be the first round, to bring about regime change in Syria. Or attack Egypt, because Egypt is a target. But once Israel starts, Israel strikes out and the first war starts, it is going to lead to one war after another until eventually it culminates with the malhama. Israel is going to wage these wars because Israel wants to take over from the United States as the ruling state in the world. Now, in order for Israel to rule the world, Israel must first demonstrate its capacity to rule over the Arabs, Make sense? Because Israel is surrounded by the Arabs. Israel has to establish, and they're listening to me in Israel, Israel has to establish its political and economic dominion over the Arabs. And the Prophet ﷺ spoke 1400 years ago when he said, Wailul lil Arab, woe unto the Arabs, min sharrin qad iqtarara, because of a great evil which is now going to come upon you. And he raised his hands and put his fingers like this and made a circle. And he said, today, but Protestant Islam doesn't understand the word today. He said, today a hole has been made in that barrier built by Zulkarnain, the Radab. And so the release of Gog and Magog began in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. Who studies Gog and Magog today? Who lectures about Gog and Magog today? Have you ever heard a khutbah from the mimbar on Gog and Magog? Never. And yet Ya'juj and Ma'juj are in the Quran. Alhamdulillah, I have a book outside, an Islamic view of Gog and Magog in the modern world, and Haji Radwan has promised to translate it into Bahasa. Alhamdulillah. When Israel launches these big wars, her first target would be the Arabs. After eliminating Pakistan nuclear weapons, the Arabs. How to establish Israeli political and economic dominion over the Arabs when the Arabs are so many? One of the weapons that Israel will have to use, that the Zionists will have to use, would be biological warfare. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ spoke about that biological warfare which is coming. This hadith is narrated by Auf ibn Malik and it is in Sahih Bukhari. I went to the Prophet ﷺ during the Ghazwa of Tabuk, while he was sitting in a tent made of leather. And he said to me, count 6 signs that indicate the approach of the Sa'ah. Number 1, my death. Number 2, the conquest of Jerusalem. And number 3, he said, a plague. Today it's no longer called plague, it's called epidemics, like swine flu and AIDS. A plague which will affect you, meaning the Arabs, in great numbers and kill you in great numbers the way a plague kills sheep in great numbers. And then an increase of wealth to such an extent that even if one is given 100 dinars, he will not be satisfied. And then an affliction which no Arab house will escape. And then a truce between you and Banu al-Asfar, who will betray you and attack you under 80 flags. Under each flag will be 12,000 soldiers. That part of the hadith is too difficult for me at this time. That truce, and then they will attack you with under 80 flags. But we do have a lecture coming up entitled Alliance with Rome in Akhirul Zaman, inshallah. A second hadith, which is in Ibn Majah and Tirmizi, narrated by Abdullah ibn Amr, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, there will come a calamity which will wipe out the Arabs. Their slain will be in hell. And at that time the tongue, Jazeera, CNN, the tongue will be more severe than the blow of a sword. The Arabs know about this. And so as soon as Israel launches her wars, the world of the Arabs, particularly Arabian Peninsula, are going to be in a state of expectancy now for that biological attack which they know is coming. But now listen, Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu said in a hadith recorded in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, he said, neither plague nor Dajjal can enter Madinah. Neither plague nor Dajjal can enter Madinah. In another hadith, even Makkah is also mentioned, indicating that there is a link between plague or biological warfare and Dajjal, indicating that the Zionists are going to use this as a weapon. So once Israel starts her wars, which are going to be soon, the Arabs know that the only place you can be safe, praise be to Allah, the only place where you can be safe is in Makkah and Madinah. You will not die from plague. But if you're outside of Makkah and Madinah, you can be wiped out. So as soon as Israel starts her wars, we can anticipate a stampede of Arabs moving to Mecca and Medina for safety. When that happens, then you're going to have both those who have faith in Allah in their hearts, fleeing to Medina, and those who are also friends of the Zionists because they also want to live, fleeing to Medina. Those who are kuffar, munafiqun, they also fleeing to Medina because they want to survive. It is at that time that the world will see. It's going to make news. It's going to be center stage in the world. When the biological war starts on the Arabs, and the Arabs are dying like sheep, it's going to make news. And the Arabs are moving, stampeding towards Mecca and Medina, that's going to make news. And so Mecca and Medina return to center stage in the world because of the plague or biological warfare. The reason why they now occupy center stage is because the angels are guarding Mecca and Medina. Because the angels are guarding Mecca and Medina, that is why neither plague nor Dajjal can enter Mecca and Medina. So we have now reached the stage where Mecca and Medina are now in center stage in the world, making the news. But that's not the end of the story. The rest of the story is going to make the Saudis very angry. Hadith of Sahih Bukhari, Anas bin Malik radiyallahu ta'ala anhu said, the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam said, there is no town that Dajjal will not enter except Mecca and Medina. There is no entrance to its entrances which is not guarded by the angels in rows at that time. But then he went on to say that Medina, not Mecca, Medina will shake 3 times. Is this going to be 3 earthquakes, geological earthquakes, or is this going to be 3 political earthquakes? Because of this chemical combustion, you have all of these people who are faithful to Islam and they despise the Saudi regime, and they're Saudis. And you have all of these others who are faithful camp followers of the Zionists. And these 2 people are together in the same town of Medina. The sparks are going to fly. And so the 3 shaking could be 3, what they call it, Arab Spring, 3 upheavals, uprisings. Could be, Allah knows best. But when these 3 shakings takes place, guess what's going to happen? Allah is going to send every single kafir and munafiq out of Medina. And they will go and join Dajjal, because he would have camped, he would have descended and camped outside of Medina in a marshy, salty land. Meaning Israel is going to attack, and the Israeli forces are going to be camped outside Medina because Israel wants Medina. Why? Because the Jews lived in Madinah. Why? Because the Jews were expelled from Madinah. Why? Study the story of Banu Qurayza. Why? Study the story of Banu Qaynuqa. And you know why Israel wants revenge. Revenge. So they're outside of Madinah, they camp, said the Prophet ﷺ. Dajjal is camped outside of Madinah. And when Madinah shakes 3 times, you know the story that the rats leave a sinking ship. The rats leave a sinking ship. These followers of Dajjal in Madinah, Saudis, Arabs, would now feel that Madinah is doomed. Doomed. So let's get out. And they go and join the Zionists. But the angels will prevent Dajjal from entering Madinah, protect Madinah. And the attack will be diverted to Damascus. When that happens, if you have not accepted Islam as yet, what are you waiting for? This is what Nabi Muhammad ﷺ said more than 1400 years ago, that this is going to happen. Nobody else has said that. No Christian eschatology has given that. No Jewish eschatology has given that. Only Islamic eschatology. Only Islamic eschatology. So as the attack is diverted to Damascus, the world will see Madinah once again in center stage. Because all the kuffar and munafiqun have been expelled. I don't know whether there will be any professors left in the Islamic University of Madinah at that time. And these words are not being spoken in any insulting and derogatory way. While still there is time, my brothers, you must stand up. Stand up for the truth. And this is the truth, regardless of the price that you have to pay. And so Madinah returns to center stage in Akhirul Zaman. All the world's attention is now on Madinah, because it is now plain as daylight. Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, in his grave in Madinah, has spoken the truth. And the angels are guarding Madinah, and therefore the truth is here in Islam. When the attack is diverted to Damascus, it is at that time that Nabi Isa alayhi salam will come down. It is at that time that Imam al-Mahdi will be in the masjid. It is at that time that when Nabi Isa alayhi salam comes down with his hands resting on the wings of 2 angels, that Imam al-Mahdi will say, here he is, this is the Messiah, the son of Mary. It is at that time that Nabi Isa alayhi salam would kill Dajjal. It is at that time that Gog and Magog will then be destroyed. It is at that time that the Muslim army will be unstoppable from Khurasan. Unstoppable. And they are already fighting. NATO is the most powerful military force in the world. And yet in Khurasan, in Afghanistan, without modern weapons, they have defied NATO for 10 years. And now NATO is embarrassed by these our brothers in Afghanistan fighting. And so now let us end with joy in our hearts for those whose hearts are faithful to Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, who despise the political system brought by Dajjal, who despise the banking system brought by Dajjal, who despise the monetary system brought by Dajjal, who despise the feminist revolution brought by Dajjal, who despise the Anglo-American Judeo-Christian Zionist alliance which is waging war on Islam, who will never be friends and allies of the Zionists. For such people, there is now joy in your hearts, because Madinatun Nabi is destined to return to center stage in Akhirul Zaman. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may protect and preserve faith in our hearts from Dajjal, that he may not destroy our faith, and that we may be able to stand up and struggle in the cause of truth, that our struggle might be successful. Insha'Allah. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta as-sami'ul 'alim wa tub 'alayna ya Mawlana innaka anta at-tawwabur rahim bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Ameen.